The first letter arrived on a hot summer morning. Thick white paper, bold red lettering stamped across the envelope, notice of violation. Marcus Johnson had seen enough of these over the past few months to recognize the format instantly. He tore it open, scanning the words as the heat rose in his chest. Failure to comply with Homeowners Association landscaping regulations. Fine assessed, $15,000. His hands shook. This was the third notice in as many weeks, each one stacking an impossible number on top of the last. By the time Marcus counted them all, the fines had reached over $250,000, more money than most people made in a decade. And all for what? For planting vegetables in his backyard. For painting his fence a shade of brown that was not in accordance with community guidelines. For leaving his truck parked in his own driveway instead of hidden away. To Marcus, it was clear, this wasn't about property values. It was about him. Marcus was one of the few black homeowners in this carefully manicured suburban neighborhood. And from the very first day he moved in, he noticed the eyes. Watching him. Judging him. Whispering about him. He tried to ignore it, to focus on building the life he'd worked so hard for. But the HOA never let him forget. Letter after letter, they tried to strip away his dignity, until one day, they decided to crush him altogether. They thought they had him cornered. They thought they had the power. What they didn't know, what none of them could have imagined, was that Marcus held a truth that would soon turn their entire world upside down. It had started long before the letters. The first week Marcus moved in, a neighbor stopped by his driveway and, with a thin smile, asked, "Are you sure you can afford to live here?" Another called the police when Marcus's teenage son walked home from school, claiming a suspicious individual was wandering through the neighborhood. Marcus endured it, telling his family to keep their heads high. He had built his career in real estate and development brick by brick, deal by deal. He knew how hard-won respect could be, and he wasn't about to let prejudice rob his children of peace. But the HOA's campaign was relentless. They fined him for the slope of his lawn, for the placement of his trash bins, even for holiday decorations that didn't match the aesthetic of the neighborhood. At meetings, board members spoke to him in clipped tones, cutting him off when he tried to explain himself. Some homeowners smirked while others avoided his gaze entirely. Marcus recognized the pattern, small aggressions, building into a storm designed to drive him out. One evening, sitting at the kitchen table with his wife, he whispered the question that had been haunting him. "Do they really think they can break us?" His wife placed her hand over his. "They don't know who they're dealing with." Because what the HOA never realized was that Marcus's success in real estate wasn't just a footnote to his life. He wasn't just a homeowner, he was the man who had quietly purchased land and properties across the county for years. Every deal, every investment, every acre had been carefully chosen and legally secured. And, in a twist too incredible for the HOA to imagine, the very land beneath their pristine neighborhood, the soil they walked on, the homes they lived in, belonged to Marcus Johnson. The breaking point came at the annual HOA meeting. Marcus walked into the community hall where the board sat at a long table, papers stacked high. Dozens of neighbors filled the chairs, buzzing with anticipation. Word had spread that Marcus owed over $250,000 in fines. Many expected a spectacle, the troublemaker, finally being put in his place. The chairwoman, her voice cold and deliberate, began reading off violations. "Mr. Johnson, you have 30 days to settle these fines, or we will initiate foreclosure proceedings on your home." A murmur rippled through the room. Marcus sat silently, hands folded, eyes steady. When she finished, he stood. The crowd leaned in, waiting for anger, for excuses. Instead, Marcus spoke with a calmness that startled them. "Thank you for outlining your position," he said. "Now allow me to outline mine." He opened a leather folder and laid out a series of documents across the table. Deeds. Contracts. Titles. Gasps echoed as he explained each one. Over the past decade, Marcus had acquired controlling interest in the development company that owned large portions of the community. Through legal transfers and acquisitions, the very land the HOA operated on, common grounds, facilities, and even much of the neighborhood itself, was under his ownership. "You fine me for violations on my own property," he said evenly, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. "What you fail to understand is that this entire association exists on land I own. The power you claim over me does not exist. In fact, it is I who have power over you." The room fell so quiet that Marcus could hear his own heartbeat. The board members shuffled uncomfortably. The smug smiles disappeared. For the first time, the HOA realized they weren't the hunters. They were prey. The days that followed felt like the unraveling of a secret empire. The HOA scrambled, calling emergency meetings, consulting lawyers, and whispering frantically among themselves. But the truth was undeniable, their authority was an illusion. Marcus's ownership of the land gave him leverage they had never anticipated. Notices of violation stopped arriving at his doorstep. The phone calls ceased. Neighbors who once sneered at him now avoided eye contact altogether, their arrogance replaced by unease. Marcus did not act rashly. He could have dissolved the HOA entirely, stripping them of their power with a single motion. He could have evicted board members from their positions or even pursued damages for harassment. But Marcus was not motivated by vengeance. What he wanted was respect. What he demanded was dignity. And what he insisted on was accountability. At the next meeting, he returned. This time, the tone was different. No smugness. No gavel pounding. Just quiet anticipation. Marcus stood before them, his presence commanding the room. "For months, you tried to bury me under fines, hoping to humiliate me. You wanted to remind me of where you thought I belonged. But you failed to see the truth. I belong anywhere I choose to be. I worked for this, I earned this, and I will not be diminished in my own home." The words resonated beyond property lines. They were a declaration, not just for himself, but for every black homeowner who had ever been questioned, harassed, or driven out of neighborhoods where they were told they didn't belong. Marcus had endured their hostility, but he emerged with power in his hands and dignity unshaken. News of what happened spread quickly. Some neighbors who had stayed silent reached out privately, ashamed they had not spoken up sooner. Others remained bitter, unwilling to accept the shift in power. But none could deny the truth. Marcus Johnson had stood against an unjust system and prevailed. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, Marcus sat on his porch, his son beside him. "Dad," the boy said, "does this mean they'll leave us alone now?" Marcus looked at his child's hopeful face, and with a gentle nod replied, "It means they'll think twice before trying to take what doesn't belong to them." He knew the battle wasn't just about one neighborhood. It was about history. Centuries of being told where black families could and could not live, what they could and could not own. This victory was more than personal. It was a lesson. Marcus never flaunted his triumph. Instead, he carried himself with quiet strength, knowing the greatest power is not to destroy your enemies, but to stand unbroken in the face of their attacks. For years to come, his story would be whispered in HOA meetings, passed around as a cautionary tale of overreach and arrogance. And for every black homeowner who felt the sting of discrimination, it stood as a reminder: dignity cannot be fined, justice cannot be silenced, and ownership, real ownership, is a power that no prejudice can erase. The HOA had tried to bury Marcus beneath a mountain of paper, but instead, he rose taller than ever, carrying with him not just his family, but the weight of a community that had waited far too long to see a man like him stand proudly in victory.